Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The United Kingdom of Israel, Foreshadowing the Reign of Christ the King. Today we'll be talking about Lesson 27 of our study, which covers the first book of Kings, chapter 9, verse 1, through chapter 11, verse 8. So, we've got a temple. Everything seems to be going well. But now, God decides to appear to Solomon again here for a second time and have a little chat with him about how things are going. So, Solomon has very publicly been announcing, well, I built the temple, so now all those promises about an eternal line and I'm going to be with you and all of those parts are definitely about me because I built that. And he's been saying that very loudly to everyone. And God now has the good taste to do this in private, but pulls him aside and says, all right, buddy, let's talk about this for real, because I didn't tell you any of that. Here's where we really are. All right, you built the temple. That's cool. I'll consecrate it. I'll live there. My name will be with it forever in some capacity and in some type of temple. Cool. I'll give you that one. But now here's the important part, which is you still have to do what you're supposed to do. We haven't gotten around that. And again, you can have all the stuff you said you wanted and you've been trying to say is definitely yours if you follow the rules. That's still fine. That was always the deal. You and your children have to follow the rules and I'll be with you and everything will go great. Fine, no problem. But you have to do it. And if you don't, here's what's going to happen. Things are going to go very badly for you to the point of even possibly being pulled out of the land and this temple you're so fond of and the whole city you worked so hard building can be just totally wiped out. I don't care. I care that you follow the rules. I don't care about the temple you built like you seem to think I will. God, again, emphasizing, Solomon, you've missed the point. It's not the thing in the place I care about. It's that you love and serve me, God. And if you don't do that, I have no problem wiping all of this out. Which is cool and correct, but then we see here in God's speech what looks at first like a pretty significant contradiction. I'm going to dwell in my temple and consecrate it forever, and I don't mind wiping it out at all. How do we get to and explain that? Key and central to that is the idea of the temple being where God's name dwells. And what is God's name? As revealed to Moses in the book of Exodus, I am who am, or who I am. God's name is, in essence, being. And when you consider that a name in the old world was looked at much more as identity and less as label as we see it now. Now I'm just called my name. I'm called Matthew. That doesn't mean fundamentally that who and what I am is gift from God, which is the meaning of that name. But in the ancient world, people's names were much more linked with identity, with who they were. So the temple being the dwelling of God's name, where really is that? Where does God's name or essence dwell? It was not ever really in that house of stone, and Jesus picks up the point very well. He himself is actually the dwelling place of God's name. And of course, God will sanctify and live there with Jesus forever. So when God's saying, yeah, we'll do that, he's not just talking about specific stone building temple. He's talking about idea of temple. Which brings us to another interesting point that's not 100% relevant, but is very worth making when we talk about Jesus being the dwelling place of God's name and, of course, God himself, is that Jesus extends and expands on the idea of God's name as I am who am. The name Jesus, Hebrew, is Yeshua, Yahweh saves. So now in Jesus, God is not only I am who am, but it is that God identity also adds on in Jesus an element of saving humanity. So in Jesus, God's identity is expanded in the way it works towards humanity. And the temple actually starts doing some of the things Solomon was saying, hey, this temple should do these things. If only you would come to this temple, then all of your problems would be solved. That actually starts to happen in Jesus. But so Solomon is in some way prophetic still in the way he talks about the temple, but accidentally. And he has totally missed the point, and by the grace and wisdom of God, has stumbled into being totally right. But God's message here is not, Solomon, you were accidentally right. God's message here is, really, buddy, you have to toe the line. This is not negotiable. You keep talking about it like you built God a house, so you're fine. That's not how this works. Fall in line, please, so I don't have to do something none of us is going to like. So now we'll check in a little bit with Solomon's relationship with Hiram, who provided so many great things from Tyre and was in an alliance with Israel. So, sounds like part of the continued deal for exchange of goods was Solomon was going to provide some cities to Tyre. And when Hiram gets a look at the ones that have been provided, he's not exactly pleased. They're not the most useful to him, and he comes to Solomon and says, what's this junk? This is not what I had in mind when we talked about giving me cities. So, although they've certainly been friendly for a long time, the relationship is not currently in absolutely brilliant state. Hiram likely feels like he got a little bit the worst end of the deal. In addition to providing all of this cedar over 20 years, he's been providing a bunch of gold as well. So he's definitely kept up his end of the bargain. He doesn't necessarily feel like Solomon has, but they're getting along still for now. And we see Solomon's construction projects did not end with the temple and his house, but rather he had a pretty ambitious nationwide plan for construction here. And how did he manage to do that? When he started construction, he levied some people from among the Israelites. He seems to have expanded his reach and his power enough in the 20 years since then that now he is using the non-Israelite people from the lands he controls all around as slaves. So he has conscripted people who are not his kinsmen, and then the Israelites who are left mostly have cushy managerial jobs. So, now I see also Pharaoh's daughter goes up and lives in her house, which is not in Jerusalem. Why a foreigner wouldn't want to live in the holy city of God, who knows? That doesn't seem unusual at all, except that it does. But it sets a precedent in part for how Solomon is treating his wives. He's giving this wife, let's say wife, although we'll soon see that it is definitely in some version of the plural. She has a lot of leeway. She doesn't have to live with him. She can live away from the holy city. We also see that Solomon is still in the practice of offering sacrifices to God 3 times a year, which initially raises the question, can Solomon, being king, not a priest, offer sacrifices? Answer, yes and no. He can certainly offer sacrifices to God and say, hey God, I hope you like this, but they don't have the ability to atone for sins the way a sacrifice offered by a priest would, because he is not a priest. So can he say, God, here's some stuff, and please help prosper my kingdom? Absolutely, he can do that. Does it have the same effect as some of the official sacrifices and methodologies laid out in the book of Leviticus and the ones reserved for priests to offer? No. But he is still currying some favor with the Lord. I mean, you can do, 3 times a year? That's enough to get God's favor, right? And then the other days you can do whatever you want. Seems to work okay. Not. Solomon is continuing to progress in his reign. Now we see he builds a fleet of ships. Why would he do that? He wants more stuff. He doesn't have enough already. He's not satisfied just ruling everything around where he is and all of these great big construction projects and other people in the area bringing stuff to him. He needs more stuff, more money. So that brings us back to the list of 3 things that the king was not exactly supposed to do, or at all. Number 1 was, and still is, and has already been violated, don't get a bunch of chariots, which is don't build a standing army, avoid gaining too much military power because God is supposed to fight for you. We already broke that one. We've got a huge standing army. Okay, 1 strike. Second one, don't amass a huge pile of gold. This looks like, and is, a venture entirely dedicated to amassing a huge pile of gold. So, strike 2. We're going after a bunch of money. The third one, we still, as far as we know right now, are fine with, which was don't take a whole bunch of wives. Spoiler alert, from just a little bit farther than now, that's also a little bit of an issue, but we don't know about it yet. So right now, we've got 2 strikes. The interesting thing is these aren't just kind of abstract affect the king categories here that we're talking about. This is the big 3 that tend to lead all of us to corruption if we're not careful. Money, sex, and power are the things that the king is supposed to avoid, specifically because he's supposed to be dedicated to and in service of God. And the king cannot be a holy servant of God while he's doing those things. So it's even less about we don't want the kingdom to exist in these ways as it is God's true wish for the king is to be a dedicated, loyal, loving servant of God, which is potentially why David could have more than 1 wife and God didn't seem to mind, because David's heart was always first and foremost with the Lord. Whereas here with Solomon we see he's not making plans and undertaking initiatives and doing things to love and serve the Lord. He's doing them to love and serve himself. So now we hear an interesting encounter from the life of Solomon and his reign. He has quite the reputation for being wise and powerful and many other fabulous things. And a foreign ruler, the Queen of Sheba, hears about this and thinks, this cannot possibly be real. I've got to go check this out, but there is no way. And so, in order to get his attention and to get an audience, she brings a whole bunch of stuff to kind of wave around and say, look at all these gifts I might have for the king. Can I meet him? That's just what you do. And she gets a chance to meet him, and he, by a slightly better translation of what happens in terms of her spirit, takes her breath away. So she talks to him just a little bit. She asks him all of her questions. She challenges him a little bit. He apparently comes off very well, and she says, swoon. She's really into the idea of Solomon and thinks, okay, yeah, you can have the stuff I brought. You're really cool, and even better than what I had heard, which I was sure was exaggerated and couldn't possibly be real. And so he obviously then forms an alliance with Sheba. In this section, we mostly see the finalizing of not only did he receive quite a lot from the Queen of Sheba, he also gave her whatever they wanted, or whatever she wanted, and finalization of the alliance. And more emphasis on, man, was he getting a lot of gold, just from all over. He was lots and lots of gold. And in that description, a very particular number comes up, the number 666, which, of course, comes up one other very notable place in the Bible, right there at the end in the book of Revelation, when that is described as the number of the beast. In that context, representing a service of self and of humanity and a disregarding of God. And that very much seems to be exactly what we're seeing here that Solomon is doing. He's paying very little service and attention to God and is entirely caught up in the human side of being a king with large piles of gold. Whatever good that'll do him in the grand scheme of things when we've seen what God is talking about, but that's where he's placing his value. In this section we continue to look at how great Solomon made his throne room, and again, more and more riches. Isn't he just the richest king on earth, and so wise and rich? And again, we will see, what does wisdom really get you if you displease God? But huge emphasis on that's what Solomon is all about, is gaining more and more stuff. We also see, obviously, if you have all that stuff and you're flaunting it so much, it would be really good to make sure that everybody around you knows you can protect yourself. Otherwise, they might decide they want to come and take it. So we transition immediately into, and remember, he had a huge army that he was paying for with his giant piles of money. And to gain more money for more army and more flaunting and more stuff, he was also involved in the trading of military forces or the equipment thereof in part of his very lucrative trade deals that he had with everyone around, which is just pretty well emphasized in this chapter, in this section. Not only was he just getting stuff from people who thought he was awesome, or tribute for probably not wiping them out with his, again, giant army, but he also was very active in regional trade, and Israel was a trade hub at that time, which contributed to their wealth. Solomon is, as we've seen, very rich and powerful and likes making sure everyone knows that. Now we cut to the last transgression we really haven't seen him make yet, wives. You're not supposed to have that many. How many does he have? 700 wives and 300 concubines. In case you missed it, that's 1,000 women. It's a lot for one guy. But there he is. And we see the major factor that God was always worried about with that is that, especially foreign wives, which these mostly seem to be, that they will lead people to worship of other gods. And we see, God knows what's up. That's exactly what happens here. Over the course of his lifetime, his foreign wives corrupt his relationship with God, which, let's be honest, was on kind of shaky footing to begin with. And they start wanting to worship their gods, and he allows them to, and he builds them places to do it. So he builds shrines on high places to other gods so his wives can worship, allowing the worship of foreign gods into Israel, which is definitely a no-no for anyone and for sure for the king. And he even starts worshiping with them. So we had the three things king's not supposed to do. Strike one, big standing army. Strike two, big piles of gold and going after money. Strike three, lots of wives, especially foreign ones. And the not even on the list because it's so abhorrent and how could anyone do it, transgression of idolatry and blasphemy, which is going against God, worshiping other gods, and by implication probably allowing for, if not leading, some of his people into that worship with him, which is the enormous deal breaker. He might have been able to negotiate some kind of deal here with God just for breaking those three things and gone back, but at the point that you're worshiping other gods, you've got a real problem. God does not go for that. So we can assume that coming up he's going to be in some amount of trouble, ranging from a lot to a whole lot. This has been an overview of Lesson 27 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, The United Kingdom of Israel, Foreshadowing the Reign of Christ the King. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.